Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Welcome back to another episode of Cut the Crop by Foundation for Arable Research. Your host for this episode, Sarah Perry, stepping in for, of course, the wonderful Alison Stewart, who is the guest on this episode. So a little flip around and what we need to do to get through recording in lockdown. Now, there is a lot of questions around the ongoing availability of synthetic pesticides in New Zealand. Many weeds, pests and disease are developing resistance to products, and there is public pressure to remove some active ingredients from the market. On top of this, many international companies just don't see the value of registering new products here because we're such a small market. But there are options, and as I said, Alison Stewart, the CEO of Foundation for Arable Research, FAR, has been involved in the successful development and marketing of several biological-based plant protection products. Now, Alison joins us to talk about biopesticides. Firstly, of course, what is biopesticides, Alison?
Yeah. Hello, Sarah, and thank you. It's a bit strange seeing you sit there. That's in my seat.
I wore my blue.
I know, and I did too. So biopesticides are basically alternatives to synthetic chemicals. And they can be living microorganisms, like fungi, bacteria, viruses, or they could be something like a plant extract or a natural biochemical or even a pheromone. And so they are quite different to biostimulants and bioinoculants and biofertilizers, because all of those biological-based products are sold into the marketplace to stimulate plant growth, where biopesticides very clearly have a claim to be able to control a pest or a disease.
Well, what regulatory approval is needed for their use here?
Well, just like synthetic chemicals that are registered as, for pest and disease control, same process has to occur with biopesticides. They have to go through and be registered as, an agricultural compound, and they need to meet the same sort of toxicological, environmental risk requirements as agrochemicals. And so we are a little bit different. There are countries overseas where the regulatory process for biopesticides is different to agrochemicals, but in New Zealand, we basically have one system and biopesticides fit in there along with the agrochemicals.
What would some of the pros and cons be in using a biopesticide over, say, a synthetic pesticide?
I think it's really important to recognise that we don't present biopesticides as, a complete alternative to chemicals. They are just part of, the whole integrated pest management program. But they do have a number of benefits because, as you know, in your introduction, you mentioned the issue about the risk of resistance building up to agrochemicals. And so whenever you've got another option that works by a different mode of action, then you've got the ability to be able to mix and match different products. So biologicals can work in a number of different ways. They can parasitize the pest or disease. They can outcompete it for nutrients or space on the surface of a plant. They can induce the host plant to elicit its own resistance mechanism. They can act by repellency or avoidance, and as well as a direct toxic mode of action. So they have a much broader way of operating, and that gives them more flexibility than, say, an agrochemical. I think the other thing is that you don't need a minimum residue level target. You don't have a residue issue with biologicals. They don't have to meet MRLs, so they can be used close to harvest time where a lot of agrochemicals can't. And I think there is a perception that biopesticides have a softer impact on the environment. And of course, they are perceived to be, have a lighter human health issue as well, so that you don't have the same re-entry interval that's required after you've applied a biopesticide as an agrochemical. So as I said, lots of different benefits, but the key thing is that they're used as part of an integrated pest management program, along with chemicals, along with disease-resistant cultivars and cultural practices.
So agrochemicals really do have a bit of a shelf life as resistance is building up. When I am looking at purchasing biopesticides, what sort of things should I be looking for and asking the questions of?
Well, I think you have to understand that particularly if you're dealing with a living microorganism, it's not something that you can just sort of throw out into the paddock and assume that it's going to work. You do have to nurture it. You do have to understand what the product actually is. So, I mean, I would always recommend to growers when they're considering using a biopesticide is they actually have to understand what the active ingredient is. Is this a living microorganism like a fungus or a bacterium, or is it a plant extract made up of a whole range of crude chemical compounds? And how does it work? Is it going to work through a similar mode of action to a chemical, or is it going to colonize the surface of the plant and potentially outcompete the pest? And when you understand what the product is and how it works, then you have a better idea of how you should be using it. And you should be getting a lot of good information from the company that's selling you the biopesticide around the best way to be able to utilize the product.
So very much about not being a standalone solution, that's a part of an integrated system. And what advice would you give to being able to work out and cross-reference with both the label and the advice you're getting from your field technician?
I think because a lot of sort of chemical companies are now selling biological products, it's important that the technical rep that is selling you the product really does understand the difference between a biological product and a chemical product. So I would be asking questions around compatibility, mode of action, and the best way to use it. And simple things like, how do you store the product before you use it? Some of these products based on living microbes, you do have to be careful about the temperature in which you store it, because obviously a living microorganism may have its viability affected if you store it in the back of a shed and the temperature goes up to 35 degrees. Similarly, when you apply it in the field, it might make sense if it's a particularly sensitive microbe that you're applying it at a cooler time of the day rather than right in the middle of the heat of the day. So it's making sure that you feel comfortable that the technical reps do actually understand the product that they're dealing with, and that they can give you good advice about how this product can be used along with all the other products that you would be putting onto your crop. A lot of biologicals are compatible with other seed treatments or other agrochemicals. They may or may not be compatible with fertilizers that you're putting on. And so you just have to know what that compatibility matrix is. And that, I guess, is reliant on the company selling it to you having done those compatibility studies and having good trial data to be able to show that the product does work in the way that they say it's going to work on your crop against the pest that you're interested in. So it's keeping the commercial companies honest and making sure that they are not trying to exaggerate what the biological product can do. If somebody says to me that this product can control a whole range of diseases on a whole range of crops and that it can be used just like a chemical, then I would be questioning the robustness of that advice, because they're not silver bullets. They can be a little bit difficult to work with, But if you put the time and effort into it, then you reap the reward from having a better, more varied, integrated pest management program for your farm.
You talked about field trials and these companies doing their own field trials, but is there some independent field trials and that Foundation for Arable Research have been doing across biopesticides, or any independent information that your members and listeners to this podcast can source?
At this stage, not a lot, because obviously we don't have a lot of biopesticide products that are registered in New Zealand at the moment. And so the data packages that are available are not huge. And a lot of the data comes from overseas countries where they might be looking at the similar pest problem, but on a different crop. And so you really do need to test the products in New Zealand on the pests and crops of interest. FAR is going to be looking at biopesticides. I mean, our job is not to evaluate, companies' products, but I think that given the fact that a lot of this is a new technology for growers, it's really important that FAR does evaluate some of the products that are out there that may be relevant to our growers, just to make sure that they are performing in the way in which they're being promoted and marketed as, and also so that we can give our growers lots of good hints about the best way to get the best out of these products. So we will be testing some, but our job is not to evaluate all commercial products that are out there. I mean, the market drives that, and the growers have to decide whether they're going to, spend money on these products or not. But we will try and support them in being able to ask the right questions. And I think that's the key thing.
Thank you so much for joining your own podcast, Alison Stewart.
I know, it's a bit strange.
I was just trying to work out how to close that, but I certainly learnt a lot then about biopesticides, and you thoroughly explained the caution that you needed to get out there in terms of the message, yet at the same time the advantages of utilising them as, the use of agrochemicals becomes less and less potentially over the next decade for lots of reasons. So I think your members will be thanking you for being able to provide that great advice, especially from, of course, FAR and FAR's Cut the Crop podcast series. That's been another episode. Make sure you check out the rest of the episodes within the series. It's been lovely to join you, and as Alison would say, have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.